Rena had spent her whole life learning that the safest place in any room was the wall, and she had found the wall in the great hall of Highmarrow the moment the guards let her in. She stood with her spine against cold stone, counting the room by its sounds the way another woman might count it by its faces. 40 people, maybe more. The clink of goblets, good cloth, the expensive kind that whispered instead of rasped. A fire. She could feel on the left side of her face, but not the right, and beneath it all, laid over the hall like a second floor, the sweetness of white lilies. Someone had cut a great many for tonight. That was how you knew it was an engagement. She was not supposed to be here. She knew that the way she knew the geography of a room she'd never entered, by instinct, by the pressure of attention. She was the herb girl. She had been sent up from the drying sheds with a basket of steeped cloths for the old seneschal's gout, and a page with a nervous voice had taken a wrong turn. And now, here she was, pressed to the wall of a betrothal feast, breathing lilies and waiting for the floor to open and swallow her. At the head of the hall, a man was speaking. His voice did something to the room. It was low and unhurried, a voice that had never once had to be raised to be obeyed. And every time it moved, the crowd moved with it, leaning, hushing, holding. The Alpha King. She did not need eyes to know it was him. His scent reached her even through the lilies, cedar and cold iron, and something scorched underneath, like a hearth the morning after. And her wolf. The small, quiet thing that had slept curled at the bottom of her all her life, lifted its head. That was the first wrong thing. Her wolf never woke for anyone. And so, the king was saying, before this pack and the 4 that border it, I give my word. At the turning of the year, the Lady Sable of Thornhold will stand as Luna of Highmarrow, and there will be no stronger union in living memory. Applause broke like a wave. Rena felt it in the soles of her feet. Beside the king, she could smell the woman. Roses and pressed silver, a scent built to be admired from a distance. The Lady Sable inclined her head to the room. Perfect. That was the word everyone used for Sable of Thornhold, and even a blind girl could hear it was true. The way she stood was perfect. The way she said nothing was perfect. Rena should have stayed against her wall. She had promised herself, coming in, that she would be a shadow, that she would wait for the crowd to shift and then slip out the way she'd come. But the king's voice moved again, and this time, it turned toward the hall to thank his guests. And as it turned, it passed across her like a hand passing across a candle. And something in the shape of it, the particular fall of it, the little roughness at the end of the long words, reached down into a part of her she had walled off so long ago. She'd forgotten there was a room there at all. She knew that voice. Not the king's voice under it, the way you know a melody hidden inside another melody. Her whole body went cold, then unbearably warm, and her mouth opened before her mind had agreed to anything, and into a pocket of silence between one wave of applause and the next, in a voice that did not sound like her own, she said one word, Ashen. She did not shout it. She barely spoke it. But the hall had that particular hush that carries a whisper farther than a shout, and the word fell into it like a stone into a still well, and the ripples went out and out and out. The king stopped speaking. Rena could not see the 40 faces turn toward her, but she felt them turn, felt the pressure of all that attention swing across the room and land on her like a physical weight, and she understood, far too late, what she had done. She did not know where the name had come from. She did not know what it meant. She only knew, from the way the air had changed, from the way the king's breathing had gone sharp and shallow at the head of the hall, that it was a name no living person was supposed to know. A name that had not been spoken aloud in this kingdom in a very long time. Who said that? The king's voice was not low anymore, and not raised either. Something worse, flat and quiet, and utterly without its ease. Who said that name? No one answered. Rena pressed harder against the wall, as if the stone might take her in. She could hear his boots now, one step and then another, coming down off the dais and across the hall, the crowd parting with a sound like a held breath, and she realized he was coming toward her, that somehow, blind and small and pressed to the farthest wall, he had found her in an instant the way she had found him. Close enough that the cedar and iron of him filled the whole world. Close enough that she felt the warmth come off his chest. Say it again. Rena's throat had closed. Somewhere behind the king, the Lady Sable's cool breathing had stopped being cool. Somewhere behind them both, 40 guests were witnessing the Alpha King of Highmarrow abandon his own betrothal feast to loom over a ragged, blind girl from the drying sheds. Rena managed. I don't know why I say it again. Not a command now. Almost a plea, buried so deep in the command that only she, standing this close, could have heard it. Please. And because she did not know what else to do, because the name was already loose in the room, and there was no calling it back, she lifted her blind face toward the warmth of him and said it once more, softer. Like an apology. Ocean. She heard him take a step back. She heard, distinctly, in the great ringing silence of that hall, the sound of the most powerful man in the 4 kingdoms losing his breath. To understand how a blind herb girl came to be pressed against the wall of a king's betrothal feast, you have to go back 4 hours to the drying sheds, where Rena was exactly where she belonged and perfectly happy about it, ever since the healer Marriage had carried her half-frozen to the far border cairns. Finding no one who wanted a blind foundling had simply kept her. Rena knew the sheds by the give of each floorboard and the particular cold that pooled in the northeast corner where the wall had never sat quite true. Here, blindness cost her almost nothing. Her hands knew every jar, her nose did the work of anyone's eyes and better. She could name a poison by the back of its scent and know a dying patient before she touched them. Rena. Mary's voice came from the doorway, and with it the smell of the rain she'd walked through. Mary was old now, her scent gone papery and dry as the herbs themselves, with that faint undernote of failing that Rena had been refusing to name for a year. Leave the Valerian. The seneschal's gout is screaming again and he won't come down. You'll have to go up. Rena's hands went still on the jar. Up! Up to the keep, up to the keep. On tonight of all nights, the whole hill smells like a florist's funeral. There's some feast. There's the king's betrothal feast, Mary said, with the particular dryness she saved for the doings of the great, which is exactly why the seneschal can't hobble down here himself, and exactly why you'll go up the servant's stair, deliver the cloths to his chamber, and come straight back down without letting a single fine person lay eyes on you. Can you do that for me, girl? I can do the eyes part easily, Rena said. It's the being seen part that's tricky. She felt rather than heard Mari's smile. Then the old woman crossed the room and did something she rarely did, took Rena's face in both dry hands. Straight up and straight down, she said, and there was something in her voice Rena would later turn over and over, unable to forgive herself for missing. You've a habit of ending up where the world is happening. Not tonight. Tonight you keep your head down and your name to yourself. Promise me. I promise, Rena said, and meant it, and broke it inside the hour. The climb to the keep was a climb into a country she had no map for. The sheds were the bottom of Highmarrow's world. The keep was the top, and everything between grew finer and stranger the higher she went. The stone underfoot changed from rough to polished. The air lost its honest smells and filled with beeswax and roasting meat, and, cresting everything, the lilies. A page took her at the 3rd landing. A boy, 13 at most, terrified of the guests and more terrified of the king. And it was his fear, she decided afterward, that undid her. He took a wrong turn to avoid a knot of arriving lords. Then another to avoid the first. And then a door opened where he had sworn a corridor would be, and warmth and noise and 40 people's worth of breathing poured out, and the boy made a small, strangled sound and fled, and Rena, reaching for a wall she knew, found only the open threshold of the great hall. She should have backed out. She has told herself 1,000 times since that she should simply have backed out. But a servant with a tray flowed in around her, and another behind, and the crowd's tide caught her and carried her 3 fatal steps into the room, and by the time she found a wall, it was the wrong one, the far wall, with the whole width of the feast between her and the door. So she pressed her back to the stone and did what she always did. She made herself small. She counted the room by its sounds. She breathed the lilies and waited for her chance to leave. It was while she was waiting that she caught the first wrong thing, and it had nothing to do with names or wolves. It was a smell. Threaded through the lilies and the beeswax and the 40 warm bodies, so faint that no one with a whole set of eyes and a nose grown lazy from relying on them would ever have noticed it. There was a bitterness, green and cold and just slightly sweet at the back, the way certain deaths were sweet. Rena's hands knew that smell. She had steeped it, dried it, warned apprentices away from it. Foxbane, wolfsbane, the old women called it, the poison cut for shifters. The one thing that could put down an alpha as surely as it put down the smallest omega. Someone in this hall of silver and roses was carrying wolfsbane, and carrying it close, and carrying it worked into something. A drink, a scent, a pin. Because the raw root smelled of earth, and this smelled of preparation. She almost said something then, and that was the irony she would turn over for a long time after, that she had nearly opened her mouth once already, before the name, to warn the hall that death was walking among the lilies. But a page jostled her. The king began to speak. The smell thinned as whoever carried it moved off through the crowd, and she let the moment close. Not her place, she told herself. A blind herb girl did not accuse a king's guests. She had surely mistaken polish for poison. She had not. She would remember that, later, when it mattered, more than anything. And then the king spoke, and her wolf woke, and the name came out of her like water through a cracked dam, and there was no leaving anything, ever again. Now she stood in the ringing aftermath of it, blind and shaking, with the king of High Marrow close enough to touch, and the whole hall holding its breath, and she understood that whatever she had just broken could not be mended by making herself small. Take her. The king's voice had gone somewhere far away, somewhere cold. For one plunging moment, Rena thought he meant the dungeons, thought of iron and dark, and the particular smell of a place where people were made to disappear. But the hands that closed around her arms were careful, almost gentle, a guard on either side, and the king said, low, to someone at his shoulder, not the cells, the East Solar, no one speaks to her, no one touches her. And Phelan, a pause, and when the name came again it was frayed at the edges. No one else hears that name. Do you understand me? No one. I understand, said a second voice, cool and dry and male, a voice that made careful decisions very fast. The king's second, then, his beta Rena, was turned, steered, walked, the lilies fell behind her. The noise fell behind her. Somewhere in the hall behind her, a perfect woman named Sable of Thornhold stood beside an empty dais on the night of her own betrothal, and Rena could not imagine what that silence felt like from the inside. She was led up a stair and along a passage, and into a room that smelled of old book leather and cold ash, and the door shut behind her, and a key turned. She stood alone in the dark. She always stood in. And for the first time it felt like a cell rather than a home. The East Solar had a clock, a tall case clock, whose pendulum swung with a heavy brass patience that filled the room, and for a long time it was her only company. She sat in a chair too fine for her, listened to it cut the night into pieces, and tried to understand what she had done. Ossian, she turned the name over in the dark. It meant nothing to her, no memory, no face, no place. And yet it had come out of her, with the certainty of a thing long known, the way her own name would. And the king who had ended the Ashfen rebellion in a single winter, whose name, mothers used to frighten children, had come off his dais and crossed his own betrothal feast to beg her, to say it again. The clock swung. Rena's wolf paced beneath her skin, restless, awake, refusing to settle. That frightened her more than the locked door did. Her wolf had been a sleeping thing her whole life. So quiet the pack women in the sheds had wondered aloud whether the blind foundling had any wolf in her at all. And now it prowled and pressed and lifted its nose toward the door, as if it could still smell cedar and cold iron in the corridor beyond. The key turned. Rena came to her feet before she'd decided to, her back finding the chair, her hand finding its cold carved arm. One person entered. Not the king. The scent was wrong, cleaner, a green scent like cut stems in riverstone, and the tread was lighter, quicker, a man who moved the way a knife moves, the beta Phelan. "Sit, please," he said. "I'm not here to frighten you. Frightening you would be counterproductive, and I've had a very long night for productivity." She heard him take the chair opposite, heard the small creak of leather, heard him set something down on the table between them, a cup, by the sound. And then the smell reached her, honeyed water, still warm. "Drink that. Your hands are shaking and it's putting me on edge." Rena did not drink it. Am I to be executed? A very direct question. A pause. "No, you are not to be executed. You are to be understood, which may prove more uncomfortable, but is generally survivable. Drink the water." She drank it. It was very good, and she hated that it was very good, and set the cup down harder than she needed to. "I don't know the name," she said, before he could ask, because she could feel the question building in the room, the way she could feel weather. "I don't know why I said it. I've never heard it. I don't know who Ossian is, or was, or I'm the herb girl. I steep cloths. I was carrying gout wraps to the seneschal and the page took a wrong turn and I ended up against the wrong wall. That's the whole of it, that's everything. I swear it on." She stopped. She had been about to swear it on her mother's grave, and she had no mother, and no grave, and no name for either. Phelan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed only slightly, but Rena lived in the country of slight changes, and she heard it. Something had shifted from suspicion towards something more dangerous to her, which was curiosity. "You truly don't know," he said. It was not a question. "How old are you, herb girl?" "I don't know that either." Mary guessed I was 5 or 6 when she found me at the cairns. "So 28, give or take. Found you where?" "The border cairns, half frozen. No pack claimed me. Mari kept me because no one else would." Rena lifted her chin, though she could not lift her eyes. "I know what I am, my lord. A foundling and a blind one. 2 kinds of nothing. And I've made my peace with it. I only want my sheds back." Phelan said carefully, as a man lays down a card he isn't sure he should play. "The name you spoke tonight has not been said aloud in High Marrow in 22 years. It was forbidden. Not by law, by grief, which is a far stricter magistrate than law ever was. There are perhaps 5 people living who know it, and every one of them would have died before letting it pass their teeth in a crowded hall." He leaned forward. The leather creaked. "And a blind foundling from the drying sheds, who by her own account cannot know it, said it to the king's face at his own betrothal. And woke something in him I have not seen in a very long time. So, you will forgive me if I do not simply send you back to your sheds. Do you understand the position you've put me in?" "No," Rena said honestly. "But I understand that I've put you in one." "Yes," he said. "Yes, you have." She heard him stand. "You'll stay in the keep tonight. Not the cells. A room, a proper one, with a fire and a door that locks from the inside as well as out, so you may believe me when I say you're a guest and not a prisoner. You'll go nowhere and speak to no one until I send for you." "Can you keep to that?" "I kept to a promise once already tonight," Rena said. "It went badly for everyone. but yes, I'll keep to it. Good. He moved toward the door, and there he paused, and when he spoke again, the careful voice had thinned enough that she could hear the man underneath it, tired and rattled and reaching. When you said it, the name, did you feel anything? Anything at all? A memory? A color? I don't know what I'm asking. Did it feel like yours to say? Rena sat very still in the dark. That was the only place she had ever lived. It felt, she said slowly, like a name I'd been keeping for someone. Like I'd been holding it a long time, in a room I forgot I had. And when he spoke, the door of the room opened, and it just walked out. She turned her blind face toward the sound of his breathing. Does that make any sense at all, my lord? Phelan did not answer for a long moment. When he did, his voice was very quiet. It makes far too much sense, he said. That's the trouble. And he left, and the key turned, and Rena sat alone with the patient clock and the pacing wolf beneath her skin, and the terrible new knowledge that she was somehow, without ever having chosen to be, exactly where the world was happening. Down the corridor behind a door she could not see, the Alpha King of Hymero sat on the floor of his chambers back against the bed, head in his hands, and said the name to himself in the dark over and over in a voice that shook, because the last person who had ever called him Ossian had been dead 22 years and he had buried her himself. They came for her before the keep had fully woken, the corridors still holding the cold blue hush of an hour with no name. Rena knew it was Phelan by the green scent before he spoke, and knew from the second, heavier tread that he had not come alone. A guard, and someone older, dry and papery, and familiar in a way that stopped her heart. Mare, I'm here, girl. The old healer's hand found her shoulder, and Rena, who had not let herself be held in years, leaned into it before she could think better of it. They sent for me at dawn. Told me my apprentice had made rather a large impression at a feast. A pause weighted with everything Mari was not saying in front of the beta. You always did end up where the world was happening. I didn't mean to. Mare, I don't understand any of it. I know, I believe you, which is precisely why I'm frightened. The papery hand tightened once, then withdrew. Now do as the Lord asks, and don't be clever. Cleverness is what got you here. Phelan let the reunion breathe for exactly as long as he could afford, and no longer. Rena, I want to try something, and I want you to understand before I do that, you are free to refuse it, and that refusing will not go badly for you. Do you believe me? No, Rena said. But I'll pretend to, if it moves us along faster. Close enough. She heard the small, dry, not quite laugh again. She was beginning to be able to summon it, and found, to her dismay, that she wanted to. The king will pass through the long gallery within the half-hour, on his way to the war room. He does this every morning. He will not know you are there. I want you simply to stand at the gallery's edge, out of the way, and I want you to tell me nothing more, whether anything happens, to you, to him. Can you do that? You want to see if it was a fluke, Rena said slowly. The name. You want to know if there's something real in it, or if I just plucked a forbidden word out of the sky by the worst luck a girl ever had. Silence. Then, yes. That is exactly what I want to know. Does it frighten you? Everything since the lilies has frightened me. This is only more of the same. She stood, finding her balance, finding the cold arm of the chair, and letting it go. Take me to your gallery. The long gallery ran the spine of the old keep, and Rena felt its length in the way sound traveled, footfalls unspooling far ahead of themselves, the high ceiling swallowing echoes and giving them back changed. Phelan placed her in an alcove, near a tall window. She could feel the thin dawn cold coming off the glass against her cheek. And they waited, and the case clocks of the keep counted, and Rena listened to her own heart and to her wolf, which had begun, very softly, to pace again. While they waited, she catalogued the gallery the way she catalogued everything, to keep the fear at arm's length, waxed wood, dust in the high corners. And portraits, she could not see them, but she could smell them. Old oil and older varnish. A whole wall of ancestors. Somewhere along it, she thought, there would be a gap. A frame turned to the stone, a face put away like a name. She did not know how she knew. She simply knew, the way she'd known the shape of his voice. And the knowing frightened her more than the waiting. "You've gone still," Mary murmured. "Stiller than the stone." "What is it?" "There's a portrait missing," Rena whispered back. "Along this wall, isn't there?" The old woman's breath caught. "How could you possibly?" "I don't know. Mari, I don't know how I know any of it." And there was no time to say more. Because far down the gallery, boots had begun to sound on stone. She heard him before she smelled him, and smelled him before he was near. Boots on stone, unhurried. That same never-raised authority in the rhythm of his walk. Cedar and cold iron, drifting ahead of him like a herald. Two sets of footsteps flanked him, advisors, murmuring, and a fourth lighter, roses and pressed silver, sable of Thornhold, walked at his side. Rena pressed back into the alcove and made herself stone, exactly as she had been trained her whole life to be. And it did not work at all. Because as the king drew level with the alcove, 20 feet out, still speaking in that low, even voice to the advisor on his left, her wolf surged up under her skin so hard she had to bite down on a sound, and the cedar and iron of him bloomed suddenly bright and specific and dear. And the walled room inside her that she had forgotten she owned pushed at its door, and she understood with cold certainty that if she opened her mouth, the name would come out of her again. Here, now, in front of the perfect Luna and 2 advisors and a guard. She clamped both hands over her own mouth. And the king stopped walking, his voice cut off mid-word. The advisor's murmur faltered. For a long ringing moment the whole gallery held its breath, and Rena, hands pressed to her lips, felt the weight of his attention swing down the length of the hall and find her in her alcove as unerringly as it had found her in the crowded feast, as if, blind as she was, invisible as she'd made herself. She were the only lit thing in a dark room. "Ashian?" It was Sable's voice, cool, no longer threaded with something careful. "You've gone pale. What is it?" A silence in which Rena could hear the king choosing. She could hear it, the physical labor of a man forcing himself to look away from a thing he needed. "Nothing," he said at last, and the word cost him. She heard exactly what it cost. "A draft. Come. We're late." And the boots moved on unhurried again, authority reassembled around him, like armor, but slower now, she thought. A half-beat slower, as if he were walking away from something with his whole body straining backward. The roses and silver went with him. The advisors followed. The gallery emptied, and Rena slid down the cold stone of the alcove until she was sitting on the floor with her hands still over her mouth, and her wolf howling silently under her ribs. "Well," said Phelan, from very close, and for the first time his careful voice had cracked clean through. "That answers that. That was not a fluke, herb girl. That was recognition." On both sides a long, unsteady breath. "Gods help us all." He crouched in front of her. She felt him consider her the way he'd consider a map before a battle. "That portrait Merrick says you named. Do you know whose it was?" "No. Only that it's gone. The king's sister. Her name is one of 2 he forbade, the other being the one you shouted at his feast." His voice dropped, meant for her alone. "There are people in this keep who would give a great deal to know a blind girl can feel out a grief the king buried under 22 years of law. Some would want you protected, some would want you gone before you feel out anything else. I have not decided which I am. But you are not going back to the sheds tonight to find out for me. Do you understand?" "I understand that you're afraid of me," Rena said quietly, "and that you don't yet know whether to be afraid for me, or of what I might dig up. That's 2 different fears, my lord, and you're carrying both." Phelan was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, and when he spoke, his careful dryness had come back, but thinner, like ice that would not bear weight. Mary warned me you were clever. She undersold it. She heard him turn to go and then stop. Keep her close tonight, healer. Both of you within these walls. Because a girl who can name a hidden grave and a hidden name in the span of a single day is either the best thing that has happened to my king in 22 years, or the bait in a trap I haven't seen the shape of yet. And I would very much like to know which, before someone else decides for us. Mary would not speak of it in the keep. She waited until they were released, and the drying sheds had closed around them both, with their honest smells of tansy and rain, and until she had barred the door with her own hands. Only then did the old woman sink onto her stool with a sound like something settling for the last time. Sit down, Rena. There's a thing I should have told you years ago, and now the world's decided to tell you itself, so I'd best get there first. Rena sat. Her wolf had quieted with distance from the keep, but not gone. Still, it lay with its eyes open now, where before it had slept. You knew, she said. You know something. You went white as a sheet when the guard said the name. I heard your breath stop, Mary. I've heard your breath every day, for all those years. Don't tell me I imagined it. I'll tell you no such thing, because you don't imagine things. That's your whole trouble. Mary's papery hands took Rena's. The name you spoke. Ocean. Do you truly not know it? I truly do not. Then I'll tell you whose it is. The king's. His child name. The one his mother gave him before he was anything but a boy. Kings take a reign name at the throne. He's Aldrich to the heralds and the treaties. But he was Ocean first, to the few who loved him small. Mari's grip tightened. And there were only ever a few, because his mother died bringing his sister into the world, and the boy and the babe were near all the family each other had. He raised that little sister half himself, doted on her past all sense. Gave her a child name too. That was their game, their private country. 2 children with secret names in a cold castle, full of people who wanted things from them. Something was rising in Rena, cold and slow. What happened to the sister? She died. Merrig said it gently, the way she said all true and terrible things. 22 years gone. A fever, the tellings say, though the tellings never agreed on much. And the king, he was near grown by then, a young alpha already blooded in the border wars. He forbade her name and his own child name, both. Struck them from every mouth in the kingdom. Grief made law. No one has said Ocean aloud in Hymaro since, for fear of what it would do to him to hear it. The old woman drew a breath. And last night a blind foundling from my drying sheds set it to his face in a crowded hall and woke his dead sister in the room. Rena could not breathe. You think, Mary. You can't think I don't know what to think. I found you at the border cairns, half frozen, 6 or 7 years old. No pack, no name, no memory that you'd ever share. You never spoke of before, not once in all those years. I used to think it was the cold that took it, or whatever hurt put you at those cairns alone. The hands trembled now. The king's sister died 22 years ago. You'd be what? Near 20, if you were she, and you're not. You're younger. The years don't sit right, so it can't be that. It can't be so simple as that. But there is something in you that knows his secret name, girl. Something that knew it before your mind did. And I have spent 11 years telling myself your blindness and your silence were only wounds. And now, I wonder if they were also a door someone. Shut. Rena sat in the ringing dark of the shuttered shed. Her whole life she had been nothing, foundling, blind, silent, a girl who steeped cloths and made herself small. And now the old woman she loved most in the world was telling her that the nothing had a shape, and the shape had a lock, and somewhere behind the lock was a name that belonged to a grieving king. She reached carefully for the oldest thing she owned. Her whole life she'd told anyone who asked that she remembered nothing before the cairns, and it was nearly true, but not wholly. There was one thing she had never spoken of, too small and strange to be worth the pity. Sometimes, between waking and sleep, the sensation of a hand in her hair, A big, careful hand, a thumb tracing the shell of her ear, and a voice she could never keep the words of, low, unhurried, humming something. She had thought it a comfort she'd invented, the way lonely children invent parents out of the weather. She had never in all those years let herself think it might be a memory. She thought it now. Mare, she said, and her own voice frightened her. It had gone so thin. When you found me, was there anything on me? Anything at all? A token, a cloth, I never asked. I never wanted to know, because knowing meant they'd truly left me, but I'm asking now. The old woman was quiet for so long that Rena's heart began to pound. Then Mary crossed to the far corner, the northeast corner, where the wall had never sat true, and Rena heard a floorboard lift that she had walked over 10,000 times without ever knowing it lifted, a small sound of cloth. And then something was pressed into her hands, soft, worn, thin as a moth's wing, and carrying even after 11 years and the honest reek of the sheds, the faintest ghost of a scent that stopped Rena's heart dead in her chest. Cold iron, and underneath, scorched, like a hearth the morning after. It was wrapped around you, Merrick said, very low. A man's neckcloth, far too fine for a foundling. I hid it, told myself it was to protect you, so no one could mark you by it, but the truth is, I was afraid of it, because it was stitched in the corner with a wolf and a crown, and I have spent all those years praying no one would ever come to claim you by it. There's more, she said. Not a question, she had lived in the country of Mary's voice too long. You're not telling me all of it. Your hands are shaking, and they don't shake for the past, they shake for what's coming. Mary let go of her. Rena heard her cross to the shelves. 3 steps, the true board, the small sounds of jars, and come back and press something cool and stoppered into Rena's palm. I want you to carry this, the old woman said. Always. On your person. Do you know it by the smell? Rena uncorked it, breathed, and went cold all over again. Foxbane antidote. The tincture for wolfsbane poisoning. Her fingers closed hard around the little bottle. Mary. Why would I need? And then the last piece fell. The piece she'd let close at the feast, and her voice dropped to nothing. There was wolfsbane at the betrothal. I smelled it. Worked into something, carried close, moving through the crowd. I told myself I was wrong. I told myself it wasn't my place. She turned her blind face up. It wasn't a feast that someone poisoned by accident, was it? Someone in that hall means to kill a shifter. A powerful one. I don't know that, Mari said. But you smelled foxbane at a king's betrothal, and a day later a name no one dares speak came out of your mouth and knocked that same king off his feet. And I have lived long enough to distrust it when 2 impossible things arrive, holding hands. Her voice hardened into the flat command. Rena had obeyed her whole life. So you'll carry the antidote, and you'll trust your nose over your manners. Next time. Whatever this is, girl, it has already decided you're part of it. The only question left is whether you'll walk into it with your eyes open. A beat, such as they are. You know what I mean. I know what you mean, Rena said, and a fist hammered on the barred door of the shed, hard enough to rattle the hanging herbs, and Phelan's voice came through it, stripped of all its careful dryness. Open the door! Now, the king has collapsed, and he will not wake, and he was saying your apprentice's name when he fell. They half ran her up through the keep, Merrick's hand clamped around her wrist, Phelan cutting ahead. She could smell it building the higher they climbed, under the beeswax, under the ghost of the lilies. That cold green bitterness, concentrated now foxbane. She had been right at the feast, and she had let the moment close. And now the whole keep stank of the poison she had failed to name. Tell me what happened, she said, breathless. Every part of it. What did he eat, drink, touch? When did he fall? He was in his chambers. Phelan's voice was tight as a drawn wire. He'd taken his morning wine, as he always does. He was. The guard says he was standing at the window, and he said the name, your name. He said, Ossian to no one. and then he simply went down. He's breathing but shallow, his skin's gone gray. The court physician calls it a fit of the heart, and I call the court physician a fool. Because I have seen a great many strong men die, and I know poison when I'm looking at it. I only don't know wolfsbane, Rena said, in the wine. It's been in the keep since the betrothal, at least. I smelled it in the hall and said nothing. Gods forgive me, I said nothing. Phyalin, listen to me. Listen. The physician will bleed him or purge him, and it will kill him faster. Foxbane doesn't want bleeding. Get me to him. I carry the antidote. I have it in my hand. She heard Phaelan decide, in that lightning way of his, to trust a blind herb girl over the court physician, and hated, distantly, that it had taken a dying king to buy her that trust. The doors of the king's chambers flew open, and the poison smell hit her like a wall. The room was chaos, the physician protesting, a guard weeping, someone calling for hot cloths that would do nothing. Rena cut through it to the great bed and the shallow, laboring breath at its center, found him by his heat and the cedar of him gone sour with the green rot of the poison, and put her hands on the Alpha King of High Marrow for the first time in her life. Her fingers read his face the way they read everything, the jaw gone slack, the sweat, the deadly coolness of skin that should have burned with an Alpha's heat. Under her palms, his pulse stumbled, and caught and stumbled again. And her wolf, at the touch of him, did not surge. This time. It keened, pressed against the inside of her skin and keened like a thing, grieving something not yet lost. And Rena thought, with a clarity that terrified her, not this one. Anyone but this one. How much wine did he take? She demanded, hands already reading the poison's progress in the clamminess of his skin, the thready gallop of his heart. Half a cup? A full one? A full one, the weeping guard managed. He takes it all at once, standing. He never. Then we've minutes. Rena rounded on where the physician stood, wheezing about hearts and humors. If you bleed him, you'll drop his heart like a stone down a well. Foxbane thins the blood already. Get back, she heard him splutter, heard him appeal to the room, and braced for the hands that would haul her off. Hold his head, she ordered instead, into the teeth of their doubt. And someone find me clean water and salt now. And no one moved, because who was she? And then Phylan's voice cracked like a whip. Do as she says, all of you. Or I'll have the lot of you flogged for the murder of your king. And the room broke into motion around her. Hands obeyed. Someone put a head between her palms. Someone else pressed a cup of salted water into her groping fingers. Rena uncorked the tincture. She counted the drops, by the sound of them, against his teeth, by feel, by a lifetime of doing this blind, while others did it by sight, and did it worse. She worked the antidote past his lips, tipped the salt water after it, to bring the poison back up before more could sink in, massaged his throat to make him swallow, turned his head so he would not choke on what came, and spoke to him the whole while in the low, even voice she used on the dying. The voice that told them the world was still here, and worth the staying. Breathe, she told him. You great stubborn thing. You don't get to go down at a window with no one's hand in yours. Breathe. Come back to. And the name was there again, pushing at the door, and this time she did not stop it, because it was the only weapon left, and she would use any weapon to keep this stranger's heart beating. She put her mouth to his cold ear, and spent the forbidden name like a coin she'd been saving her whole life. Come back, Ashen. For 3 long seconds the room did not breathe with him. Then the King of High Marrow dragged in a breath like a man surfacing from black water, and his cold hand closed around Rena's wrist, not to push her away, but to hold, to keep. And, though his eyes did not open, his cracked lips moved, and he answered her in a whisper that only she, bent close, could have heard. A name, not his own, a child name, small and worn, smooth with love and grief, the twin of the one she'd given him, the secret name of the sister he had buried 22 years ago. And it was not a stranger's name to Rena at all. It landed in her like a key in a lock she hadn't known was there, and the walled room inside her did not merely open its door this time, its whole wall came down. She had no words for what poured through the gap, no pictures. She never had pictures, but a flood of things beneath them, the hand in her hair, the humming voice, a garden that smelled of crushed time, a laughing boy swinging a small girl onto his shoulders to touch the top of a doorway, both of them with secret names. It was gone as fast as it came, dissolving the instant she reached for it. But it left its shape in her like a hand pressed into wax. She came back to the room to find her own face wet, and the king's hand still locked around her wrist and the whole chamber staring at her. She could feel the staring, that old familiar weight, in a silence gone suddenly, dangerously different from the panic of before. Because she had shouted the forbidden name across a crowded feast, and now she had whispered it over the king's deathbed and pulled him back by it, and every soul in this room had heard her do it. "Get her out," someone hissed from near the door, not Phelan. A new voice, smooth and cold and edged with roses and pressed silver. Sable of Thornhold had come, and she was not careful now. "Get that creature away from him before she finishes what she started. Phelan, she reeks of the very poison that felled him. Ask her how a Sheds girl comes to carry an antidote to a poison no one knew was in the keep. Ask her that." And Rena, kneeling in the wreckage of her own shattered wall, one wrist held fast in the grip of a king who'd just breathed his dead sister's name into her ear, realized with a plunging horror that the perfect Luna had just in front of witnesses named her the poisoner. It was a good accusation, and Rena, trained her whole life to hear the shape of a thing, could hear how good it was. She reeked of foxbane. She'd steeped it for years. It lived in the creases of her hands. She carried the antidote, with no witness but Mary, and she had appeared from nowhere, the very night the poison entered the keep, speaking names she had no right to know. Laid end to end for a frightened court, the truth looked exactly like a plot. "I didn't," Rena began, and heard how it sounded, the guilty music of every cornered innocent since the world began. "Of course you'll say so." Sable's voice never rose. It didn't need to. "Phelan. She had the means, the poison on her person, and some hold over the king's mind that none of us can explain, and all of us just watched. I don't say she's guilty. I say only a fool clears her before she's questioned, and Hymero cannot afford a fool tonight." A pause, delicate as a blade laid flat. "Or has the king's second also fallen under the Sheds girl's spell?" Rena waited for Phelan to answer. The whole room waited. And into that waiting, before the beta could speak, the hand around her wrist tightened. The king's hand, the dying king, fathoms deep and gray with poison, and King Aldrich of Hymero, who could not open his eyes, who could not lift his head, who by every law of medicine Rena knew should not have been able to speak at all, said in a cracked thread of a voice that carried to every corner of the silent room, "No one," he breathed, "touches her." And then he was under again, gone back down into the dark, leaving the whole court staring at a blind foundling that their dying king had used his last waking breath to shield. The king did not wake for 2 days, and for 2 days Rena did not leave his side, because he would not let her. Phelan had wanted her questioned. Sable had wanted her in irons. The court had wanted, with the pure appetite of frightened people, someone to blame. And all of it had broken against a single immovable fact. Whenever Rena's hand left the king's, his breathing turned to gravel, and his heart stumbled, and the gray crept back up his throat, and whenever she took it again, he steadied and slept, truly slept, deeper than the poison. They drew her away twice, and twice the king began to die, and the second time even Sable had gone silent, so they left her there. A blind foundling, accused of murder, kept at the bedside of the man she was said to have killed, because she was the only thing keeping him alive. Merrick brought her food she didn't eat. Phelan came and went like a tide, saying little, watching much, and Rena sat with the king's hand in both of hers and learned him by inches that his hands were a soldier's, scarred across the knuckles, but the scars were old. That the hard line of his mouth, awake, was a thing he built each morning, because asleep it fell into something younger and unbearably tired. That when the dreams took him, and they took him often, his hand would clamp down on hers with a drowning man's strength, and that if she hummed, low and tuneless, he would ease. She did not tell anyone that the humming was not hers, that it had come up out of the fallen wall inside her. The same melody, the waking dream voice had always hummed, and that she was only giving it back to him. She learned other things too. That servants spoke over her head as if blindness were deafness. That the keep was at war with itself about her, half murderous, half miracle, and no one simply calling her by a name. That Sable came to the door twice and left without entering, and, most strangely, that she was not afraid. She had been afraid her whole life, of being seen, of being sent away. But sitting in the dark with a king's life running through her two hands, the fear had nowhere left. To stand on the evening of the second day, his hand turned in hers. Not the drowning clamp. A question. His fingers moved against her palm, exploring, and Rena went very still, because she knew the exact moment a sleeper becomes a waker, and this was it. "You're awake," she said quietly. A long breath. When he spoke, his voice was wrecked, scraped to nothing by the poison, but it was his. "I can't see you. The room's dark. They've drawn everything. They drew the curtains for the poison. Light was hurting you." A pause. "I couldn't tell you whether it's dark. It's always dark for me. So we're matched tonight, you and I." Silence. She felt him understand, felt the still attention of a man reassembling the last thing he remembered, and reaching the edge of it, and finding her there. "You," he said. "The feast? The gallery. You're the one who—" His hand tightened. "You said my name." "I did. Twice at the feast. Once over you, when you were dying, because it was the only thing I had left to throw at death and I threw it." Rena's throat closed. "I'm sorry. I know it's forbidden. I know what it costs you to hear it. I didn't do it to wound you. I did it to keep you. And I don't even understand why keeping you mattered so much to a stranger, except that when I put my hands on you, my wolf grieved you, like she'd already lost you once, and I couldn't." She stopped. She had said far too much. "Say it again," the king said, just as he had at the feast, and just as at the feast, buried in the command, meant only for her. "Please." So she did. Ossian. His breath left him all at once. And in the dark they shared, matched at last, the Alpha King of High Marrow, who had struck that name from every mouth in his kingdom, who had ruled 22 years behind a face he built, each morning, laced his scarred fingers through the blind girls and wept, silently. Because someone had finally said the name of the boy he'd been, before the world took everything from him. They stayed like that a long while. When he could speak again, his voice had changed. Not the king's, not quite the wrecked whisper either, but something between. "Tell me your name. You know mine now." "It's only fair, Rena." He turned it over the way she'd turned over his. "Rena," he repeated. And there was a catch in it she couldn't read. "A good name, a small brown bird, loud for its size. That's me exactly, apparently. Everyone tells me I talk too much. You've been unconscious 2 days, and even you found time to notice." And the King of High Marrow laughed, cracked and rusty and startled out of him, the laugh of a man who'd forgotten he owned one. "You do that without thinking. Reach for me, as if you've done it 1,000 times. I've been doing it 2 days. No longer." His thumb moved over her knuckles. "Your hands know me. I felt it the first time you touched me. Half dead through the poison, my wolf went quiet, like it had come home. That doesn't happen. Not for me. Not ever. I don't know what you are, but I don't think you're a stranger. I think you're something my body remembered before my mind could argue." Rena sat very still, her hand in his, her wolf keening its soft grief beneath her ribs, and did not tell him that she thought so too. That the humming was his mother's, or his, or theirs. That the fallen wall inside her had a shape now, and the shape frightened her. She was not ready. Neither of them was. So she only said, "Sleep, Ocean. Whatever we are, it'll still be true in the morning. And you heal in the dark, so let me give you the dark. It's the one thing I've always had enough of to share." He slept. And Rena sat guard in the blackness. They both lived in, humming the old melody, and felt the bond between them set, like a bone, knitting, pulling two lost people toward a truth neither could yet bear to see. There was no word honest enough for it. When the physicians declared him mended enough to leave his bed, the king did not send the sheds girl back to her sheds. He installed her, the household scandalized, delighted word, in a chamber 2 doors from his own. Fire always lit, and each night, because the dreams did not stop when the poison did, he sent for her, and she sat by his bed with her hand in his, and hummed until the king of Highmarrow could sleep. Phelan was appalled, and did not entirely hide it. "You understand how this looks," he said low in the gallery. "A blind foundling, accused and still not cleared, sleeping 2 doors from the king, while his betrothed sits in the guest wing reading the whole court's pity in every face. I know how it looks better than you because I hear it. The whispers stop when I pass, and start again behind me. I hear what they call me." She turned her face toward him, "but I also hear him breathe. I've heard a great many men die. He was going to be one of them, curtains drawn, hand empty. Now he sleeps. If the price is being whispered about, I've paid worse, for less." "You've grown less afraid," he observed. "When they first brought you up, you flinched at your own voice. Now you argue with the king's second in his own gallery. That's your fault, mostly. You keep answering me like I'm a person. It's a hard habit to break, once someone starts." She heard the dry, not quite laugh, warmer now, worn into something like friendship, but under it, she heard the fear Phelan had carried since the alcove. "The poison. I've traced the wine to a cellar steward, who's since vanished, paid well, and sent far away where no one would find him. No accident. It was aimed at the king. It entered this, keep the night of the betrothal, and it's still out there. I haven't told him. He has ghost enough." A pause. "I'm telling you because you smelled it first. And I think you'll smell it again before I see it. I need your nose, herb girl. Will you be my eyes?" "Yes," she said, "but then you answer me one thing, and answer it true. The sister, the one whose name he buried with mine. How did she die?" Phelan's silence went on too long. "You said fever in the sheds." "You'd have said fever," Rena pressed. "But you don't believe it. I can hear you not believing it." "How did she die, Phelan?" "No one knows," he said finally, very low. "That's the truth I've never said aloud. She was there, and then she was gone. And the king. He was away at the border war. He came home to a fresh grave and a story about fever that no one who told it could look him in the eye. He was young, half mad with grief. He didn't question it, he couldn't bear to. He forbade her name and rode back to his war and buried himself in it for a year." Phelan drew a breath. "But I was a boy in this keep then, a page, and I remember the night the grave was dug. And I remember it was dug in a hurry, in the dark, by men who left the next morning and never came back. Fevers don't need graves dug in the dark, Rena. I've wondered for 22 years. And now a blind girl wearing a crust cloth walks in, knowing his secret name. And I find I can't stop wondering." Rena stood very still in the gallery of the king's ancestors, and felt the 3 separate threads of her strange new life, the poison, the name, the sister, draw suddenly, sickeningly close together. As if some hand she couldn't see were braiding them. "You think they're the same thing," she whispered. "Whatever took the sister, whatever wants the king dead now. You think it's the same hand 22 years apart." "I think," said Phelan, that you should not go anywhere in this keep alone. And I think you should keep that antidote closer than your own skin. His voice dropped. And I think, God's help me, that you should keep saying his name. Because he sleeps when you do. And a sleeping king can heal, and a healed king can be protected. But more than that, he hesitated. I've served him 22 years, Rena. 2 days ago, I watched him weep for the first time in all of them. Whatever you are, whatever you turn out to be, you gave him back something the grave took. Don't let them take it again. That night, when she came to sit by the king's bed, something had shifted. He was not lying down, waiting for the dark. He was up at the window, and he turned when he heard her and said, "Walk with me. I've been abed 3 days and I'll go mad in it." Phelan says, "You can find your way anywhere by nose and memory. Show me." So they walked, the king and the blind girl, through the sleeping keep, and it was Rena who led, which no one had ever let her do. She found the kitchen by its bread smell, the chapel by its incense, the armory by its oil and iron. He said little, and she understood it was its own kind of confession from a man who had led everyone, everywhere, for so long. At the end of the gallery he stopped her. "There was a portrait here," he said. "You can't see the gap, but you stopped the first time Phelan brought you. He told me. You stopped in this exact spot and went still." His voice was very careful. "How did you know?" Rena stood in the dark before the frame. She couldn't see. Her wolf pressed at her ribs. The fallen wall inside her ached like a healing break. "I don't know," she said. And it was almost true. "It smells sadder here than the rest of the wall. Like something's missing that everyone agreed not to mention." She turned her face up toward where his would be. Who was she? Ossian. The one who's not here. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My sister." The word cost him everything. "She was blind, like you. Fever took her sight at 3, and I loved her the more for it. She saw people the way you do, underneath. I used to carry her on my shoulders to touch the tops of doorways. She'd laugh so hard, she'd nearly fall." His breath caught. "She died, so I was told. When she was 6, I was away at the border. I came home to a grave, turned her portrait to the stone, forbade her name, and have been a locked room ever since." A pause. "Until a blind girl said a different forbidden name at my feast. I've not been locked since. I've stopped trying to understand it." Rena could not breathe. "She was blind, like you. She died when she was 6. I used to carry her on my shoulders to touch the doorways. The waking dream, the hand in her hair, the humming melody. It was rising in her, the truth, vast and impossible, and she was not ready. She was not ready. We should go back," she said, "too fast. You need the dark to heal." He let her turn him. But at the mouth of the gallery, he said quietly, almost to himself, "Her name was," and stopped. "No, I won't. Not even to you. It's the last thing I have of her that's still mine." And Rena, walking her brother back to his bed through the corridors, said nothing, and wept without sound, and did not tell him that she had been carrying his last thing inside her own chest all along. The Lady of Thornhold requested an audience. Just the two of them. In the guest wing, a courtesy. The whole keep found ominous. Phelan wanted to refuse it for her. Rena went anyway, because she had spent her life being disposed of by other people's caution and wanted badly to hear the perfect woman up close where the performance thinned. Sable's rooms smelled of roses and pressed silver, and, underneath, of something Rena hadn't expected, exhaustion, the staleness of someone sleeping poorly and hiding it. "Sit," Sable said. Not unkind, just used to being obeyed. "You're wondering why I called you a poisoner in front of the court, and why I'm civil now." Same answer to both. "I don't think you poisoned him. I never did. But I needed the court to hold that question open, because the real question, the one everyone was actually asking, was far more dangerous to me. And what were they actually asking? Rena said. Whether their king had just chosen a blind sheds girl over the Lady of Thornhold, in front of everyone. By breathing her a dead woman's name, the exhaustion smell sharpened. I was raised from birth to be Luna of somewhere. Groomed, priced, perfected. Thornhold spent a fortune making me worth a crown. And 2 nights before, I'd have become the most secure woman in 4 kingdoms. A girl who owns nothing walked in and made me, in a single word, the least. So, yes, I called you a poisoner. It was cleaner than letting them call me refused. Rena listened to all of it, the pride, the fear, the loneliness under both, and found, to her surprise, that she could not hate this woman. You don't love him, she said slowly. I've met him 4 times, Sable said. But I'd have been good at it. That's what no one tells you about women like me. We're not villains, we're investments, and we spend our lives terrified of not paying out. A pause. I'm telling you because I'm leaving quietly, before the court can make a spectacle. I release him. But first I'll give you the one thing I have that you'll need, because I'd rather not read about your death in a courier's letter. The silk rustled closer. The night of the betrothal, the wine that poisoned him. I saw who carried the flask into the cellar corridor, because I was hiding there myself, gathering my nerve. It was no steward, whatever Phelan's found. It was a woman in a healer's gray, old papery. She moved like she knew every stone of this keep in the dark. The floor dropped out of the world. No, Rena said. I'm sorry, said Sable. And the terrible thing was that she sounded it. I don't know her name. But you brought a healer up with you, the second day, an old one, and half the keep now calls her your mother in all but blood. I thought you should hear it from someone who bears you no malice before you hear it from someone who does. Rena did not remember leaving the guest wing. Only the corridors going wrong around her, scent and sound sliding out of their places, her wolf clawing up her throat. Mare, who had found her at the cairns. Mare, who had hidden the crest cloth for all those years. Mary, who had pressed the antidote into her hand 2 hours before the king was poisoned. How does a sheds girl come to carry an antidote to a poison no one knew was in the keep? Sable had asked, and Rena had never once thought to ask it of the woman she loved. She wanted it not to fit, but Rena had spent her life fitting pieces she couldn't see, and the pieces fit. Marig knew every stone of the keep in the dark. Mary had gone white when the guard first spoke the name Ossian. Not surprise, she understood now, but terror. Mary had produced a crest cloth from under a floorboard. Mary had carried an antidote for a poison no one knew was coming, because she was the one bringing it. Every kindness of a whole life. Suddenly, a lock on a door. It doesn't mean she wanted to hurt him, Rena said aloud, to the empty corridor, to her clawing wolf, to no one. It doesn't mean that, but she could not make herself believe the woman she loved was only what she'd always seemed. Because Rena knew better than anyone in the world that people were mostly the rooms they kept shut, and she had never once thought to smell for the shut room in Merrig. She had trusted the one person she'd never questioned. She found Merrig in the small chamber they'd given her, grinding something by feel, and Rena stood in the doorway with her whole reconstructed life coming apart in her hands. You put the wolf's bane in the wine, she said. Sable saw you carry the flask. The grinding stopped, and Marrig, old, papery, beloved, the only mother Rena had ever known, did not deny it. That was the worst of it. She set down her pestle, and the small chamber filled with a silence so complete that Rena could hear the herbs cooling in their bowl. Then, the old woman said, in a voice gone suddenly ancient and unbearably sad, "Sit down, Rena. There's a thing I should have told you years ago. I keep saying that, don't I? And I keep being too late." "Don't," Rena's voice cracked. "Don't be gentle with me. Not now. You've been gentle with me my whole life, and every kindness turns out to have been a lock. So don't. Just tell me. Did you poison him? Did you poison the king?" "Yes," Mary said. The wolfsbane in the wine was mine. I carried the flask. Sable saw true. Rena's knees went. She found the edge of a stool and sat because she would have fallen otherwise, and her wolf, which had been clawing, went horribly still. The stillness of an animal that has understood it is trapped. Why? She whispered. You raised me on. Do no harm. You beat it into me. A healer who kills is a healer who's forgotten what hands are for. You said that. You said it 100 times. I say it to the apprentices. Why would you? I didn't try to kill the king, Merrick said. Not the king. I tried to kill the man. He was standing near, and I missed. And the servant carried the cup to the wrong table, to the wrong royal throat. A breath that shook the whole small room. I tried to kill him 22 years ago, Rena. The one I aimed for tonight, and I've spent every day since paying for how badly I failed at even that. The old woman turned her blind navigating face toward the girl she'd raised. Sit, child. It's time you knew what you are, and what I did to keep you from ever finding out. You've been carrying half a soul your whole life and calling the empty place normal. I'm the one who emptied it. So the least I can do is fill it back in before I go. I loved his sister, Mary said. That's where it starts, and you'll want it to be a lie, and it isn't. I was healer to the old queen, and when she died bearing the girl, I raised the babe half myself, her and the boy both. The two royal children, with their secret names, Ossian and his little Rena. The room tilted. Don't, Rena whispered. Don't say it's my name. It's your name, Merrig said, gently, mercilessly. It was hers first. Princess Rena of Hymero, the boy's shadow, the keep's darling blind from a fever at 3, and loved past all sense for it. The king carried you on his shoulders, so you could touch the tops of doorways. Do you remember that? You've been dreaming it for all those years, and calling it a comfort you invented. The hand in her hair, the humming voice, the boy swinging the small girl up, not a stranger's memory pulled through a fallen wall. Hers. Always hers. But the ages, Rena said, drowning. The sister died 22 years ago. She didn't die, Mary said. You were 6, a child. And here is the thing I have carried alone for all those years. The thing that has rotted me from the inside, until you can smell the failing on me. Because you can. I know you can. Her voice broke and steadied. The old regent, the king's uncle, meant to rule Hymero himself, while the boy king was away at the border war. A blind princess was no threat to a throne, but a blind princess who was the king's whole heart. She was leverage, and leverage is dangerous, because it can be taken by the other side. So he decided the child should simply disappear. He ordered me to see it done. Me, the healer, who loved you. He knew I'd be gentle. He knew I'd make it look like fever. Rena could not breathe. I couldn't do it, Merrick said. But I couldn't refuse him either, or he'd only send someone who would. Someone who'd not be gentle, so I did the only thing left. I put you into a sleep so deep, it counted as death, and I let them dig the grave in the dark. And I carried you out of this. Keep myself inside a coffin, meant for a princess, and I ran. I ran to the far border. I woke you at the cairns, and the sleep had taken your memory, and half your words. And I told myself that was mercy, that a girl who didn't remember being a hunted princess could just be a foundling, could just be safe. I raised you as nothing, because nothing is the only thing no one comes to kill. And the poison, the wolfsbane. Now, at the betrothal, that was me, Rena, because I tried to kill the uncle. He's here. He came back for the wedding, an old man now, an honored guest, and I saw him across the hall, and 22 years of failing rose up in me. And I put foxbane in the nearest royal cup to reach his table, and the servant carried it to the wrong royal. To the king, to your brother, I have spent my life failing to protect you, and the last time I tried, I nearly killed the one person left who loves you as I do. The silence in the small chamber was total. And into it, from the doorway, came a voice like the world ending low, and very quiet, and utterly without its ease. "Say it again," said King Aldrich of Hymero, Ocean, Rana's brother, who had followed her from the guest wing on a brother's instinct. He did not yet understand, and heard all of it, and now stood swaying in the door, with 22 years of grief rearranging itself behind his eyes. "Say her name again." "Rena," Mary wept. "She's Rena. She's your Rena. She never died. I'm sorry. Ossian, I'm so sorry." "I've been sorry for 22 years." And the Alpha King crossed the room, past the woman who had poisoned him, and dropped to his knees, in front of the blind sister he had buried, and put his scarred hands to her face, as gently as if she might yet be a dream, and read her the way she read everyone. "Little Wren, I put you in the ground. I carried the coffin. I felt how light it was. I thought it was because you were small. I thought," his whole body shook, "you were alive, all this time, holding my hand in the dark. And I never knew you. I never knew me, either," Rena said, weeping, her hands over his hands. "But my wolf did. She grieved you the moment I touched you. She's been trying to tell me since the lilies." A broken laugh through the tears. "You carried me on your shoulders to touch the doorways. I remember. I thought I'd invented you. Ocean. I thought I'd invented the only good thing I had. I've spent a lifetime telling myself the humming was a comfort I made up, because foundlings make up parents out of weather. It was you. It was always you." For a while, neither could speak. They held each other and let the grief come out sideways, the way it always does, in fragments, in half-sentences, in the helpless laughter on the far side of the worst crying. He told her about the doorways. She told him about the waking dream. He had kept her child name locked in his chest, as the last thing that was his. She had been carrying it in hers the whole while. And they marveled that a name could be halved and kept by two people across a grave, and still set beside its other half fit. And then, because Rena had spent her life learning to hear the room, and not only her own heart in it, she heard Mary weeping in the corner, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear. And Rena knew that posture from the inside. She had lived in it. She turned her blind face toward the woman who had murdered her childhood to save her life, and she did the hardest thing she had ever done. "Come here," she said. "Rena." The king started, low and dangerous, 22 years of grief curdling toward the woman who'd caused it. "No," Rena said, and there was steel in it now. The steel that had been building in her since she stopped making herself small at a dying man's bedside. "Listen to me, both of you. I spent 11 years believing my parents left me because I wasn't worth keeping. That if I'd been better, quieter, less trouble, they'd have stayed. I built my whole self around deserving to be abandoned." Her voice shook but did not break. "And it was a lie. I wasn't abandoned. I was carried out of a grave in a coffin by a woman who loved me too much to let a regent be rid of me, and who then loved me too much to tell me the truth and watch me be hunted for it. She didn't take my life, Ocean. She's the only reason I have one." She reached toward the corner, toward the sound of that ancient weeping. "You did a terrible thing to save me. And then you did a lifetime of small, terrible things. The silence, the lies, the crust cloth under the floor. Every one of them a wound, and every one of them a shield. I can hold both. I've had to hold both my whole life. Come here." And Mary came on her old knees, across the floor, and Rena took the papery hands that had emptied her and filled her both, and the three of them knelt in the wreckage of the truth, the brother, the sister, and the healer who had damned herself to save a child. And something that was not quite forgiveness but lived in the same country, as it settled over the room like the first warmth after a long fever breaks. And there, in the small gray chamber, the whole tangled truth finally free, the king of Hymero held his lost sister and grieved and rejoiced in the same breath. While behind them, unnoticed, a floorboard creaked in the corridor under a careful, aged, patient tread. as someone who had listened long enough turned and walked quietly away. The uncle knew now, too. The leverage was alive, and leverage, as he'd said 22 years ago, was dangerous, because it could always be taken again. The reckoning with the uncle is a tale for another night. How the old regent, learning his crime, had walked back into the keep alive, moved to finish it. How Rena's nose found the second poison before it reached a single throat, because she had learned at last to trust it over her manners. How Phylan's long patience closed around a trap the old man never saw laid. And how a blind princess stood before the same court that had whispered at the shed's girl, did not make herself small, and named her own royal blood in a voice that never had to be raised. That is a longer story, and a bloodier one, and it ends the way such stories should. The guilty answering for the guilt, the innocent, for once, believed. This is the shorter thing, the truer thing, the part worth keeping. Grief did not undo itself all at once. You do not get back 22 years because you learn they weren't what you thought, you only carry them differently. The king still woke some nights with his hand clamped around nothing, still stopped some days for a long time before the portrait in the gallery. But it hung facing the room. Now, her small blind painted face returned to the row of ancestors, and beneath it, most days, someone had left fresh time, the garden they'd played in as children, which Rena could find by smell. There was no clean justice for Mary, who had harmed no one and saved everything and poisoned a king by accident. In the ruins of an old mercy, the king could not pardon her, and could not condemn her. The arithmetic broke every law he had. So he did the only true thing left. He let her live out her failing days in the drying sheds where she had raised his sister in secret, tending the herbs, waiting for the illness she'd smelled on herself long before anyone else. Rena went down to her every day until the end, and sat among the tansy and wormwood, and held the papery hands, and did not pretend it was simple. Some wounds you do not heal, you only refuse to leave anyone alone inside them. But there was this, and it was enough. Each night, in a keep that no longer forbade two names, the King of High Marrow and the blind princess who had come back from her own grave, sat together in the dark they had always shared. Sometimes she hummed the old melody their mother had left them both, and he wept, and it was a good weeping, the kind that empties a wound instead of feeding it. And sometimes they said nothing at all, brother and sister, two children with secret names in a cold castle, no longer wanting anything from each other but the certainty of the other's breathing in the room. On the last morning of this telling, Rena woke to pale light she could not see but could feel, warm on the left side of her face, and the sound of her brother asleep in the next chair. Truly, asleep. Deep and easy, no hand clawing at the dark, no dream dragging him under, no name he had to keep locked in his chest to keep it safe. She sat very still, and listened to him breathe. No poison in the cup, no grave waiting in the dark to be dug, no small, safe, invisible, nothing she had to fold herself into, to survive. Just the two of them, and the morning, and the long, slow work of being. At last, no longer, nothing. She settled back, and let her blind eyes close, and matched her breathing to his, and slept.